Good evening, everybody. I hope everyone is doing very well. I've received some feedback on the blog from a viewer that has been probably one of the most loyal viewers and readers so far, that there could be some things we can do to make the presentation in the video format a little bit more understandable and comprehensible to people. And so that certainly is feedback that is well warranted, and I will try to use a structuring today format to to make the ideas as communicable as possible, and I hope that that I achieve some sort of success with that today. And incidentally, the viewer or the reader is from the Bay Area, so tonight I'm honoring the viewer with with the Niners. Anyway, continuing on today, we're going to, again, use a slightly different format today. And I thought it would be helpful if we looked at this, sort of tried to frame the post through a series of questions and answers. And I think some of the questions will be as generic as possible. And the answers, of course, will be much more involved. But the three or four questions I think that could sort of structure the post in the best way is, first, what is this work that you're talking about today? What is this book or or treatise or whatever? What is it about? What is can you give me? Can you provide some sort of short framework about what this book is driving at? Second, what are the key passages? What are the key arguments or key passages that you want to focus on? Because I definitely do think that most works, they do have certain passages that really the whole work almost turns on them, and even sometimes you can isolate it to a few words. If you read carefully enough, you can a word or two sort of can make all the difference in a work. So, what are the key passages of the work? Third, whatever good or subject we're discussing and putting this this work under, what does this book have to tell us about this work? What is it, for example, when we were discussing Rousseau's Emile, what did that work have to tell us about, I think we talked about love or beauty, and how can you frame sort of the work and its meaning within the context of the goods that we're discussing in this work? And then finally, I think the last question would be, what questions and what problems does the work leave unresolved? And that's sort of a core principle, because of course something that we've stressed over and over again here is that these ideas and these works, while helpful, while illuminating certainly some ideas that we had not thought about before, while sort of showing the weaknesses in ideas that we've maintained throughout our lives as deficient in some way, as not being complete, as fundamentally lacking in some sense, they still don't answer every question, and often they raise more questions. And of course, I think I was watching a lecture last night, or it was a talk. I'll try to link to this video. It was by a professor by the name of Miles Brunyett, and he was talking about, he's a Plato scholar, and he said that I was talking about Plato, and he said that the Platonic dialogues are so rare because they really inspire the reader to think for him or herself, and to raise really the power of the dialogues is that they raise questions and then show us that what we had thought before about something is not quite true. It's not quite complete about a subject, and then that even though that's true, that even though we leave reading the Apology or the Republic or any of Plato's works or Aristotle feeling somewhat deficient in our prior conceptions or common sense notions, we're lacking in some sense. Despite that, we're still richer for having read that work and considered it. We're not left poorer, but we're left richer with at least a better appreciation of the problem, and with a better idea of of how we need to attack the problem, and an understanding, of course, of that going forward full steam based on an inadequate conception that we had previously had, that we've been shown from reading the work is inadequate, it's probably not the best idea either. So, so I think in that sense, it's important always to leave all of these works with an understanding of what's been left unresolved. So today we're going to look at the Crito. It's another Platonic dialogue written by Plato, and it's usually viewed in conjunction with our first question, of course, is what is this work about? So this work is usually read in companion with the Apology, and in the Apology, of course, Socrates has to defend himself against charges brought against him by the city of Athens that he's been that his philosophizing in the city has been corrupting the young. It has been making the weaker argument the stronger, and that he has been basically, causing trouble for the city and urging people to break its laws. Socrates defends himself in the Apology. One of the main arguments he makes is that his philosophizing is actually good for the city. The image he uses is that of a gadfly that comes and stings a large horse. The city that is very powerful and strong, but yet is slumbering and sleepful, and is in a sort of an image that's very critical in Plato, is that people are going through the world asleep, and that Socrates, in some sense, helps people to wake up. Whether that's true or not, we have to, of course, decide for ourselves. But that's certainly one defense that Socrates makes, that I'm a gadfly, that I help the city wake up from sort of its methodical, plodding, sleeping way of going through things, and in this sense, I'm good for the city because I wake the city up and rouse its energies and force it to think about things that are more important than the things it thinks about. He talks about how, why is everyone in the city constantly thinking about wealth and pleasures of the body rather than the state of their soul, being a virtuous person, being a good person, developing in many different ways. So that is his defense, and of course, in the Apology, the defense is unsuccessful. He is convicted, he's sentenced to death, and now we move to the Crito, which is a dialogue between Socrates and Crito, who is a friend of Socrates, an older gentleman. And the dialogue occurs in a prison cell, and this is when Socrates is waiting, basically, to die. He will be put to death after a ship returns to the city, and this ship is either coming today or tomorrow, and then that's when the dialogue is cast. And during the dialogue, Crito basically implores Socrates and asks him to allow Socrates to let him escape. Crito and his friends have money, and they can bribe people and the jailers and help Socrates escape from jail and avoid death. And that might involve going to another city. And all of this, Crito and his friends are willing to do because they don't want to see Socrates die. They think he's a very valuable person, and they would hate for people. Crito makes this argument. They would hate for people to speak poorly of him later on. Crito, that is, for not making an attempt to save Socrates. And Socrates responds to all of those arguments by saying no. No, I don't want you to save me. He primarily says that he very interestingly depicts a discussion between the laws of the city of Athens, which he has a mythical character of the laws, and himself. And this is sort of a fake conversation in Socrates' mind. Basically, it's predominantly about a half of the dialogue is this speech, this fictional speech that Socrates has in his mind as to what the laws of the city of Athens would tell or would say to Socrates himself. And primarily, to sum up that argument, the laws, Socrates imagines that the laws would say, look, we raised you, we educated you in the city, we provided you with many different amusements and educational pursuits. You were sort of created from the city. I think the word is you were begat, and you were allowed to live in the city and develop as a human being. You went around philosophizing. You enjoyed all sorts of benefits from the city, and you never left. You continued to live in the city in Athens throughout your life, reaping the benefits of whatever services we provided and benefits the life of the city, the life of the community provided, and you never left. And so, in addition to not leaving, we gave you a chance to persuade us at your trial. You had a chance to defend yourself. You had every right to present any argument you wanted, and you did so. And because of that, again, in this mythical dialogue, the laws say, how could you possibly now want to hurt the city now by doing this, by running off with Crito and showing disrespect for the laws of the city? Isn't that a form of injustice for you to do that now after reaping all the benefits of citizenship throughout the years, and now harming the city in this way, flagrantly disregarding its laws, its institutions, and showing that you're above the law? And that wouldn't be a good example, would it, for the city, particularly for someone that talks incessantly about being a virtuous person? That this sort of flagrant disregard would not be in line with what you've been preaching, what you've been discussing and imploring other people. You'd be guilty of the greatest hypocrisy to preach that virtue and goodness is the most important thing, and then for you to when your life is in danger now, just throw all that out the window. Several times throughout the argument. Throughout the speech, Socrates talks about, if we did this, if I ran away, wouldn't it be just as if all those arguments, all the things we said over time, now they're all mush and they're all sort of cast aside because now we've got something, there's a danger. And he says that would be almost childlike to do that. You have to either take the argument and see it to its conclusion, or you have to abandon the argument. So after all that discussion, Socrates, in his mind, says, "Crito, do you have a response to this? Do you have anything that would convince me that it would be wrong for me to flee now at this point?" And Crito says, "No, I have nothing to say, Socrates." The second to last line of the dialogue. The last line of the dialogue is, "Let it be then, Crito, and let us act in this way, since this is the way the God is leading us." So, in that sense, Socrates says, I can't act. I can't leave because I've come up with an argument in my mind that would show it's unjust to leave at this point. And Crito, you have a chance to respond, and he doesn't respond appropriately. So basically, the dialogue ends with Socrates refusing Crito's offer to help him save his life. So that, in a nutshell, is the argument. Is what happens in the Crito. Now, some of the key arguments, the key sections in the dialogue, I want to focus on now. One of the first ones is that, first of all, Socrates argues that a just person doesn't care too much about what the majority thinks. Crito says, argument gets teed up, and Crito says, why? If you don't allow us to save you, everyone's going to think we were caring more about money than saving you, and that would harm us. And Socrates immediately responds, no, you can't be harmed by the majority. They can hurt you in certain ways, but they really can't hurt your soul. And that you shouldn't care so much for what the majority thinks, but you should care about what the wise think. And so whether or not the majority thinks or that you should try to save me or whether I should leave, that's irrelevant. And that's sort of the whole point of the dialogue. Is that he's going to not decide this question with Crito based on what the majority thinks, but what he thinks is right, what he thinks is just, based on his reason. It's always about, for Socrates, it always comes down to what is reasonable, what's just based on reason, what he can think through rational arguments. What the majority thinks, what he feels, all those things are almost irrelevant to him. And it's just what he stands for. It's a way of life that he embodies probably more than anyone else in the philosophic tradition. So Socrates says, no, we shouldn't care so much about the majority. We should care about what the wise or the people that really know about a subject know. And he, talks about someone that's doing gymnastics. He wouldn't care about what everyone else, what the majority thinks about the proper way to do gymnastics. He would care about what the expert in gymnastics has to say about that. And he goes on to say, let's see here. Here, there's a great passage here. Socrates says, one should value the good opinions and not the bad ones. Yes. Crito says, yes. The good opinions are those of wise men, the bad those of foolish men, of course. So again, it's not any opinion that you should take seriously. It's the opinions first that are good and that are from wise men. Now, what that means or how you can distinguish those things is, of course, very difficult. But it's not every opinion doesn't get equal consideration, is Socrates' argument here. It's all dependent on the goodness of the opinion, the wiseness of the person that's giving you the opinion. He talks again about another passage here, and Socrates says, we should not then think so much of what the majority will say about us, but what he will say who understands justice and injustice, the one that is, and the truth itself. So that in the first place, you were wrong to believe that we should care for the opinion of the many about what is just, beautiful, good, and their opposites. Basically the argument we just went through. He then goes on to say, what really matters is not in life is not just living, but living a good life. He says, passage here is, the most important thing is not life, but the good life. And that the good life, and then Socrates goes on and says, and the good life, the beautiful life, and the just life are the same. Does that hold? He asks Crito. And Crito says, yes, it does hold. He goes on to say, so that's sort of two main arguments. Another argument that we get is, again, I think, something that the core Platonic idea, central to Socrates' teaching, is that it's never good to do wrong. He says here, is to do wrong never good or admirable, as we have agreed in the past. Above all, is the truth such as we used to say it was, whether the majority agree or not, and whether we must still suffer worse things than we do now, or will be treated more gently. That nonetheless, wrongdoing is in every way harmful and shameful to the wrongdoer. Do we say so or not? Crito says we do. So one must never do wrong. Crito says certainly not. Nor must one, when wronged, inflict wrong in return, as the majority believes, since one must never do wrong. That seems to be the case. Come now, should one injure anyone or not, Crito? One must never do so. Well then, if one is oneself injured, is it right, as the majority say, to inflict an injury in return, or is it not? It is never right. Injuring people is no different from wrongdoing. That is true. So again, this idea that whether or not one is harmed, what matters is the soul, the character of a person, and wrongdoing always will hurt you more than it will hurt the other person, so we should never do wrong. And then he goes through, into the argument that we talked about with the citizenship, with the conversation between the laws and himself. I want to focus on a few passages here. That he has the laws in this mythical conversation coming up to him and saying, tell me, Socrates, what are you intending to do? Do you not intend by this action? Do you not by this action you are attempting intend to destroy us, the laws, and indeed the whole city? So so far as you are concerned? Or do you think it possible for a city not to be destroyed if the verdicts of its courts have no force but are nullified and set at naught by private individuals? Again, the laws, speaking in this mythical conversation, goes on to say, is your wisdom such as not to realize that your country is to be honored more than your mother, your father, and all your ancestors, that it is to be more revered and more sacred, and that it counts for more among the gods and sensible men, that you must worship it, yield to it, and placate its anger more than your fathers? Here is really one of the central arguments. You must either persuade it or obey its orders, and endure in silence whatever it instructs you to endure, whether blows or bonds, and if it leads you into war, to be wounded or killed, you must obey. To do so is right, and one must not give way or retreat or leave one's post, but both in war and in courts and everyone else, one must obey the commands of one city or persuade it as to the nature of justice. Again, this idea of either obeying the rules of the city and its judgments, obeying it after one has tried to persuade the city that the city is not correct or that the laws are not just. That's the progression. There's really nothing. There's no other step in the Crito and what Socrates is saying. There's nothing after you've attempted to persuade people of the justice, the injustice of a law or the justice of a certain idea you have or your actions. You have to obey. You can't just disobey the law at that point, even if it involves grave injury to yourself. And that's certainly a very controversial idea, but it's an idea that Socrates takes very seriously here. And goes on and says, the city, again, the laws say in this mythical conversation, we have given you birth, nurtured you, educated you. We have given you and all other citizens a share of all the good things we could. Even so, by giving every Athenian the opportunity, after he has reached manhood and observed the affairs of the city and us the laws, we proclaim that if we do not please him, he can take his possessions and go wherever he pleases. Not one of our laws raises any obstacle or forbids him if he is not satisfied with us or the city. If one of you wants to go and live in a colony or wants to go anywhere else and keep his property. We say, however, that whoever of you remains, when he sees how we conduct our trials, has in fact come to an agreement with us to obey our instructions. We give you, again, it goes on to say, we give two alternatives, either to persuade us or do what we say. So that is basically, I think, some of the key arguments of the dialogue, and so now placing this in the context. When I read this dialogue, again, I had read it, I think, about 13 years ago, and of course this version is one that I is probably the first. This book is probably the first encounter I had with philosophy, probably about 13 or 14 years ago, and so this book has survived. But as I was rereading this tonight, I was thinking more. Obviously, the dialogue is talking about politics and the duties of a citizen in terms of obeying the laws, being a good citizen, attempting to persuade the city of its injustice of its laws, but then obeying under any circumstance because of the various benefits that citizenship has bestowed on everybody, on the citizens of the city. But I thought about this actually in terms of a different realm of life, and I thought about this in terms of work. And what it means to be a worker in an organization, and of course, I think at the time that this dialogue was written, people didn't work for companies. There were no companies at the time, and there was nothing, there's no offices or anything of the sort. But I found the ideas very transferable in some sense, perhaps in some sense to the worker and his rights and his obligations. In the same way that that a citizen receives the benefits, nurturing, training, development in a city, from the city. So a worker would gain many things over the years from a job. He would gain prestige, he would gain training, he would learn things, he would have a livelihood, which would allow him to, feed a family, have a nice home, raise his kids. He would have experiences and develop certain tools and capacities, training, perfect his various attributes, make a name for himself, all of those things. But to the same extent, of course, working in most modern companies, there's hundreds of rules and laws you have to follow. Most workers get, policies and procedures handbook and set of rules that they have to comply with. And in my thinking, as I thought about this issue more, I think the argument Socrates makes about the proper way to be a citizen could in some ways definitely have some appeal as to how we think about what it is to be a good worker. And of course, that's one thing that is very important to people today, because in fact, people spend probably most of their adult life working. If you go to graduate school, maybe you extend it out, but for a lot of people work 40, 50 years as a worker, and they're subject to various laws, and they have to abide by them. And I think if we take the arguments in the Crito seriously, and if there is a transferability to the realm of work, then we would have to consider whether those arguments would hold in the level in the realm of work. And if they did hold, if we can't make any distinctions between what Socrates says about citizenship and what he says about and what we could think about work, then it would mean several things. First, we'd have to owe a debt of gratitude to any job that we're in. It's obviously done a lot of things for us. We can't have an unfairly negative attitude towards a job even when it's bad, because of course it's developed a lot of capabilities. It's allowed us to live a certain form of life. It's been a part of our upbringing, and then if we reach a point where there is some injustice that happens to us at work, some perceived injustice, then the only option we have is to convince the people at work, the employer, that we have been unfairly damaged, that there has been some injustice done to us. We have to work within the system. We have to try to present our arguments, persuade with reason, with argument, with reasoned argument, of course, with persuasion, with marshaling of facts, that some injustice under the rules have happened. And then, if we, of course, we convince the employer, then everything is resolved. But if we don't convince the employer to change a rule or to treat us a certain way, then we have two choices, just as Socrates, as the conversation in the Crito between the laws and Socrates came out. We can leave the job, or if we stay, we have to abide by what the job requires of us. And not only that, we shouldn't try to harm and cause havoc at the workplace by continuing to grumble about the working conditions or doing things to sabotage the work environment or anything of the sort, or to sort of go beyond the procedures, to spread rumors and lies about the workplace. All of that would be inappropriate if we take the arguments in the Crito seriously. The only option we have at that point is abide by the rules of the employer, or leave the job. And to me, that seems like a pretty difficult argument to overcome. I mean, if in a world, especially today, where you do have complete freedom of choice in terms of employment, there's at-will employment almost anywhere. It doesn't seem just for someone to stay somewhere and to continue to do things that would harm the employer, that would harm morale after attempting and failing to convince the employer that there's something wrong. And there's of course legal avenues that you can pursue. You can quit and pursue a lawsuit, all those things. But I think this argument in the Crito that is presented as citizenship would certainly apply, I think, in a very powerful way to guide our workplace frustrations, to guide our workplace conduct, and to make sure that we are attempting as best we are able to convince the employer of some injustice. But if we are not able to convince, then to shut down the criticism and to either go somewhere else, which we always have the right to do, and or stay and abide without causing more havoc. So I guess that's sort of what I got out of the Crito, in a sense, as to what it means to be a good worker and to be a just worker. And I think the only unresolved issue here is there can you make an easy comparison between citizen in the city and the worker in work? If the arguments are, the situations are vastly dissimilar and you just can't make the comparisons, then you can't transfer the argument over. It's dangerous to transfer an argument that works in one area of life to a completely different area of life when that area is totally different. It's foolish. So unless you can come up with some way to distinguish the arguments, distinguish the two areas of life, then I think you're going to have to take very seriously this approach to being a good worker, and of course a just worker, and a good citizen and a just citizen. In my case, based on sort of what I've seen as to what work, the nature of work today, and the types of benefits people get, and the types of training, and all those things, it doesn't seem like there is much of a large comparison to make, distinguishing attribute, especially because of the freedom to leave and quit the job. Of course, Socrates would say, for him, that he had the freedom to leave, but he didn't want to do so because he thought it was disgraceful. Now, of course, we may have the freedom to leave a job that may impose economic hardship, but I think Socrates would say that's secondary to any harm that would happen to your soul by staying somewhere and continuing to agitate. So that's one question. And of course, I guess the second question would be, if does this view of the just worker sort of encourage employers to tyrannize? I'm not sure it does, because again, if people are leaving jobs, then the employer will probably not continue with acting as it does, and probably won't be successful if it continues to lose workers and has to continue to train and hire new workers. That's not probably going to be a very successful workplace that has to do that. So I don't think that this view encourages sort of unjust workplaces, because I think employers will always be damaged and want to change things around and be more just if they realize they're losing a lot of workers. So I hope this has been hopefully a more clear post than previous posts. And if it has, we'll continue with this format. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.